Okay, hello and welcome to yet another edition of the Red Groove Revolution podcast. This is episode 15 of the Red Groove Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Earl Holder, excuse me, aka DJ Solero, and I have my special guest in the house, guitarist and a founding member of the psychedelic rock group, the Gllass Prism, Mr. Tom Varano. Mr. Varano, thank you so much for availing time out of your schedule to come on the show.
Earl, thanks so much for having me on the psychedelic rock group.
Yeah,
Well,
glass prison.
everybody has to be categorized these days. We
Yeah, I
think
know. At the
rock
end of
and
the day,
roll
it's
band.
all yeah, at the end of the day, it's all music, right?
That's it. That's it.
All right, well, for starters, how did the Glass Prism first get together? You guys were originally called the El Caminos, correct?
Yeah, back in the day, as we call it, 1960s when we started, a lot of bands were using names of automobiles like the Cadillacs and the T-Birds, and that was a kind of a normal thing. So the El Camino is a Chevy kind of car slash pickup truck that they made. So that's kind of what I always thought of. Then I found out that our drummer Steve took the name from his Spanish book. So the band started in 1960, actually, and it was a while with the same musicians doing little parties and hoping that we could start to play rock and roll music in front of the kids that we went to school with. So at some point, maybe 1961 or two, we had the band ready to play stuff by Chuck Berry, stuff by Jerry Lee Lewis. Copy bands were the thing. And we wanted to play those songs in front of our friends. So we rented a ballroom called the West Side Park Pavilion Ballroom in Berwick, Pennsylvania, where the only bands that ever played there were big bands like the Dorsey Brothers, Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller. It was for big bands. Rock and roll bands were just sort of getting underway. So we were the first rock band to rent this place, and we started running our own dances. And you'd have 800 to 1,000 kids coming to see whatever it is you had. And that's how we got our start. The band stayed together with the same guys until about 66, when the drummer on the way to one of our shows had an accident. Steve Bond passed away. And at the same time, our bass player, Jim Schrader, was heading off to college. And it was within a week or so that I had to replace the drummer and the bass player. I auditioned players like Rick Richards, who ended up to be the drummer, Augie Cristiano, who ended up to be the bass player. Both of these guys could play and sing really well. And so for the next year or two, we were a busy band. We played all the time. So you're rehearsing once a week. You have gigs 2, 3, 4, 5 nights. And you're trying to maybe do some original music. So about 68, Augie said, "Hey, I got an idea. I'm going to write the music to Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven." So him and I got together and we put together an arrangement that included a Hammond B3 organ, piano, drums, bass. Everything worked really nice with the melody. And I thought, I have a book at home of Edgar Allan Poe's poetry. And I opened the book and I started writing songs to some of the other poems. The first one was El Dorado. Turns out that The Raven and El Dorado were the first two songs that we recorded as a demo. And also that became our single. And the idea spread. So Augie wrote some more songs. I wrote some more songs. We were up to 11 songs. Now, this is like late 1968, early 1969. And Gene Weiss, which was an executive for some recording companies, brought Mort Lewis, who was the manager of Simon and Garfunkel, Dave Brubeck, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, to see us. And we were playing at a teen club called Tuesdays. And our thing was not just to play those songs, but also to wear outfits that were kind of, big collars, ruffles, kind of like the look, sort of thinking of Sergeant Pepper's, where the Beatles are all dressed, kind of like that kind of look, not coordinated, but it was great. So our show was not just a band playing songs, we were doing a stage show, and we turned it into a whole set. And the kids, which were always having fun and dancing, stopped and would crowd up to the stage as close as they could get because we were putting on a show playing this unusual music. Mort Lewis said to us after we were done playing, said, "Why don't you come to New York?" And we went to his office in New York City, and he had a contract for us to be our manager. So we hired a lawyer to read it, make sure everything checked out. Everything worked out fine. We went to New York and did that demo of the Raven and El Dorado. And within about a week, RCA handed us a contract. The contract was a 1-year deal for 2 albums, a bunch of money, like we'd never seen anything like that before. And we thought, well, this is going to be pretty cool because we're going to record for RCA, which at the time, the big record labels were Capitol, Columbia, and RCA. They were one of the top companies in the country. Nobody from our area up in Northeast Pennsylvania ever had any kind of deal like that. We thought this was going to be a good thing. After years of playing and working and trying to get ourselves a record deal, we've got one. And then the president of the company said, "We want you to go over to Les Paul's studio. Instead of recording at one of the RCA studios, Les Paul was going to be the engineer, the guy who invented the electric guitar and all these other devices used in recording studios before anybody else." Turns out that we were the only artist that Les Paul ever produced in his whole career, other than himself with his wife, Mary Ford, when they were recording their own things, where he was doing echo and reverb and double tracking and quadruple tracking.
This was in Mahwah, New Jersey, right?
That's where he was. And for us, this was what kind of deal? We lived at his house for 3 days. During those 3 days, we recorded the whole album. We also drove into the city to do the photo sessions for the album cover and other photos that they use for advertisements. This is looking good, don't you think?
Yeah.
So now when the single comes out, you had these magazines back then, Cashbox, Billboard, Record World. These publications went not just to the public, but went to radio stations. And they were where they were listing the top 100 songs, top 100 albums. Back then, we didn't have 16 different style categories. It was all, you were either in the top 40 or you weren't.
Right.
So these publications would list who they thought was going to have a top 10 song. And every week there was something new. So our song and our album was listed as, this is going to top 10, which means it might be going higher. Mort Lewis says, Blood, Sweat, and Tears is releasing Spinning Wheel, which was their second hit single, and they were going to go on a major tour with us. So we're scheduled to do a tour with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. This all sounds pretty good. We're going to be in front of 10,000, 20,000 people because they're going to do some stadiums as well as big theaters. And that's a lot of people for 1969, 1970. Well, just before the tour is supposed to start, we get a phone call, and the president of RCA says, "We can't find Mort Lewis. He left New York City, and we're going to have to wait till he surfaces before we do any more advertisement, do any more pushing. And the tour is on hold with Blood, Sweat, and Tears." We know that Mort Lewis went to Florida because he had a yacht there. And back in those days, nobody had cell phones. There was no real communication. landlines, right? No one could reach Mort Lewis. So we were waiting and waiting and waiting. And we were busy playing, and our material was getting played on the radio stations all over the world. We were on the charts, but it wasn't going the way RCA would have liked it to go because they held everything back, waiting for Mort to reappear. 11 days before the end of the first year, we get a phone call from Gene Weiss, who was partnering up like as a co-manager with Mort Lewis in our group because he found us. So he was like going to be a partner, although he wasn't able to really do what managers did. He had nothing to do with the other artists like Simon and Garfunkel that Mort Lewis was managing. But Gene called up and said, you have 11 days to get to RCA studio to record your second album. We weren't ready for a second album. So over the next 11 days, we wrote 10 songs. And when we got to studio A, or I think it was A, and at RCA, we wrote another song. So over a 3-day period, we recorded the second album, which is called On Joy and Sorrow. Mort Lewis doesn't appear. We don't see him or hear from him, and everything is falling apart. So by the end of the second year, 71, things, we've been playing for years. And one of the guys, Carl Syracuse, ended up going with the group called The Boys, which had a hit song called Timothy. And Augie, the bass player, moved to New Jersey to get a new start. We continued as a trio with Rick Richards on drums and Louis Casa on bass and keyboards. And myself, we're kind of like a power trio. We stopped playing the songs of Poe Through the Glass Prism, and we moved on to doing some other new original material. We recorded an album in 1973. And then by 76, I thought, I've been doing this now for about 16 solid years, and I need a break. And I got an opportunity to go to New York, upstate New York, and partner in a booking agency management company, which is what I did. So my vacation turned out to be forever. And it wasn't until 2007, while I'm managing other artists and booking other people, that we decided to do a reunion show. So in 1969, Poe Through the Glass Prism comes out. It's somewhat successful, but things disappear and fall apart. In 1970, On Joy and Sorrow comes out. Nothing special happens. But these two albums turn out to be interesting to other people. So not only do we reunite in 2007, but in 2010, Bandiria, which is a label from South Korea, calls me up and we do a deal where they're going to release our two albums on CDs, which at that time, CDs were still the thing.
Right.
The albums were released exactly as they were originally recorded, with the same album covers, just smaller size. Even the same inserts. Remember how they had the sleeves that the vinyl records would sit in? They even used the same sleeves, which would be advertising other artists releasing products on those labels at the time. So those albums come out in 2010. Then we get a call from Sony in 2021. They want to release the albums on all digital platforms. And of course, Sony bought out RCA. So now the albums are out on all digital platforms on the internet. You can find them, you can get them there. Then this year, 2024, in June, Gerson Records, which is a label out of Spain, calls me up and says, we want to release your albums on vinyl again. So that happened in June of 2024. This is something that started in 1960, 68, 69 is when the recording stuff happened. And in 2024, we're doing podcasts.
You guys have a cult following.
That's something like what's happening. We did a reunion show 2007 at the Edgar Allan Poe site in Philadelphia. There's 4 Edgar Allan Poe historic sites. One's in Philly, one's in Richmond, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland, and the Bronx, New York City. These are places where Edgar lived, where he wrote certain poems, certain stories, and our albums are archived there. Now, in 2008, a documentary came out about our group. The documentary features, the guys in the group talking about the group and all these other promoters and people that knew us, including the last recorded video of Les Paul, who did an interview and talked all about how we stayed at his house and how we recorded. The interview was done mostly at the Iridium nightclub, where Les Paul would play every Monday. This happened to be the last interview that he did before his passing. He was 92 when he passed away. So he's part of that documentary, which was played in, I think it was in Detroit, was one of the places where they had it. They had it in Philly. They had it in various places. So the documentary has been aired on television stations hundreds of times all over the country. I'm not sure exactly where. I know some of the places, but not all of them. So there's a documentary about the group. So this is all stuff that continues to sort of keep the group alive. And we did other shows along the way. Plus, after one of the concerts that we did at a theater in Scranton called the Mellow Theater, it's at Lycoming College, a record company owner, Deborah Records, came up to us and said he would like to record another album. And would we do Edgar Allan Poe as the theme? So we did another album in 2010 called Resurrection, which includes 5 of the songs from the first album rearranged and re-recorded, and 9 new songs using the themes of Edgar Allan Poe. So that album is out. Plus, when Mr. Plotkin, the owner of Deborah Records, released that album, he also released our album that we recorded in 1973 to come with it. So it's a double package. You can either buy one album or the other album, or they come as a double package. So it's something that has gone on. And when we changed our name to the Gllass Prism in 69, that was because of the Poe through the Gllass Prism theme. But in 71, we wanted to get away from that as we were moving on to be a power trio, and we changed our name to Shenandoah. So there's 3 names associated with this group: El Caminos, Gllass Prism, and Shenandoah.
What are some of your memories, some of your fondest memories recording your debut LP, Poe, Looking Through the Gllass Prism?
Well, we pulled up to Les Paul's house. This is where his studio was connected to. And the guys from 10 years after had just left the day before. And we're hearing, wait a minute, 10 years after was just here? They were doing a demo. Never got released, but they were there. And we walk in, and Les has, he invented the electric guitars. He's one of the guys. And he's got like a glass room. I guess he built 4 glass walls, and he hung all of the first guitars that he built in there. And I happened to have purchased a Les Paul custom in April, and it's now June. So I have a Les Paul black, beautiful guitar that I still use, that I bought in 1969. It is in 1968. So I come in and I say, after we're setting up and we're, running through some things. And I said to Les, I said, would you play something for me? I want to watch you play. And he says, I've done all of that. He says, it's your turn. So that album, I'm playing a Les Paul guitar on it. We stay at his house overnight for these 3 nights. And when we get to the part where when we've recorded all the tracks, and after you do the tracks, you're doing the vocals. So we had finished the tracks for the Raven late at night, and we needed the vocal. So the next morning, after we had finished the tracks for the Raven, Les Paul, and by the way, in the mornings, the way he would wake us up, the alarm clock, was he had speakers in every room, and he would play marching music and turn it up loud to wake us up. Anyway, he goes into the room before he wakes the rest of the guys up to talk to Augie, who's singing lead on the Raven. And he says, Augie, come on, let's go do it. And he hands him a cup of coffee, and they go into the studio. And if you listen to the Raven and you hear Augie singing it, that is take one. He knocked it out. And you know what that's like if you know about recording. You have to do take after take. You have to fix things. You have to, especially these days, they're adjusting tuning, they're doing all kinds of tricks, right? One take, that's how that song was done early in the morning. And that stands out as something that's unusual.
Now, one of my personal favorite songs off the album happens to be A Dream Within a Dream. How did that song come together?
Well, that's the thing where when I said to Augie, because this Raven thing was done, we finished it. I went home after the first rehearsal and opened up my Poe book and started writing. You see chords over all the different words that Edgar wrote, and El Dorado was the first one, but there were a total of 11. But so I did that one. The next rehearsal, I taught the guys that song, and I said, Augie, let's do more. And he went home and wrote that song. The intro has got this guitar wah-wah thing on it. I don't know, it came somehow in my head. So we kind of wrote things together because he's the bass player. He doesn't really know what the chords should be or how the arrangements should go. So we worked on these things together. But that's an Augie song for sure. That's him singing the lead, and we're adding 4-part harmony in the background that just seems to work. It's a really pretty song. The song itself, all by itself, to sit with the piano or a guitar and just play it and sing it, it's just a beautiful piece of music. And I give all the credit to Augie for coming up with the idea to use that set of poetry and to come up with that beautiful melody.
How do you feel about the group being sampled in hip hop music? The group's first 2 albums, Poe Looking Through Gllass, Prism, and on Joy and Sorrow. How do you feel about those albums being sampled?
Um, there are a number of songs that I know have been used. No one asked us if they could use it. They just did it. So, and that's okay. To me, it's a compliment. I'm not worried about getting paid for it. I'm just happy that think about this. These young guys looking to sample have thousands and thousands of songs to figure out which one they want to use for whatever their idea of a song is. These are album cuts. They're not even hits. They found these off of albums. So Dream Within a Dream, it's used by 2 different artists, not one, but 2 different artists use that. Song called Him, which is off the first album, and Rick, our drummer, is singing lead on it. It's a beautiful piece of music. That song's been sampled. From the second album, Here You Are is a song that's been sampled. Another song that's been sampled is She on Joy and Sorrow, which is basically the theme of the album. And here's how they sampled it. It's a group called Atmosphere, right? The way they sampled it, they sped it up. But a lot of people that sample things just use a piece. They sped it up and used the actual recording. And when you hear the vocal in the background, it's the original vocal sped up a little bit. It sounds a little funky, but it works. They also released it at the original speed. And that's us. You're listening to us with them doing a rap on top of it. That's what it's all about. So I just take this as a compliment. It's recognition. And hey, I want people to play it on the radio. I want people to talk about it. I want people to come and see the band when we do shows, which we've done some shows, not a lot. I mean, we're not young at, we're not able to do what we used to do. And when we do shows, every show has a theme, because I always thought of us playing live as not just the band playing music, but as a show. And that's how the Poe thing happened, with us becoming a show mobile, coming up with outfits and doing things on stage, not steps like the Temptations or any of that, but a rock band, making it more than just the music. That's at least what we always did. When we recorded our latest album, Resurrection, we turned that into a rock opera, which we performed at the Scranton Cultural Center for thousands of people. And we created a whole thing. We had an MC. We had a guy playing Edgar Allan Poe. His name is Casey Thomas, an actor. So we did a whole staging set with all kinds of designs all over the place. A lot to do with, like Black Cat, that kind of stuff. So the rock opera was from our latest album, Resurrection. And it was using the songs from the album and also mixing some other songs, because it's a whole story. It's a whole story about protection and shelter, and that kind of idea was mixed together. So for us, it's always been the music and the showmanship.
That actually leads into my next question. I was going to ask you rather, what are you guys up to these days?
Well, there's different things going on all the time. We're doing radio interviews. We just did a television interview with station WBRE in Wilkes-Barre. We just had 9 radio stations play The Raven on Halloween, because it's kind of like a Halloween kind of theme. And we just found out that we did a podcast, Music of America podcast, with Tom Pollard. And that podcast was about 6 or 8 months ago. But they did a thing at the end of the year for the podcast that was watched or listened to the most, and ours was number 1. He did a top 10. Ours was number 1. Now I find out that he's going to use The Raven because it's known as a Christmas ghost story. And that's something that's been out there in the world. So that song and the song Hymn, because it talks about Mother Mary, and that's kind of an interesting theme. So those songs are supposed to be coming out on his Christmas show, which I guess is going to be within the next couple of days. That'll be aired. So we'll be on that. So October 31st, we were on 9 or 10 stations that I know of for Halloween, probably more. Because there's lots of different stations that have contacted us. And they'll call me and say, hey, we're going to play your song. You want to say something about it, or do like what you're doing right now? So this kind of thing that you're doing happens pretty much regularly. We get contacted every day. We have 2 Facebook pages and a Facebook group page. So there's 3 places online that people can get on, see what's going on with the band. We've got our documentary on there. We got a live concert on there. We have all 47 or whatever it is of our songs that are available. We're not worried about making money. We're just, here's a song, here's another one. And every single day of the week, I get contacted by a minimum, I can't keep a record of it, of 50 some people, maybe 100, I don't know. It's every day I get emails. We have an email fan list. We have, it's called Gllass Prism Fans. That's if you go to Facebook group and you want to check it out, you can join it. And these things are adding up. There's thousands of people, and we belong to some other, mostly entertainment music type groups that are online. I think there's 500 and some that we belong to. So all of these have thousands of membership. So we're there. And since our albums were released and also pressed in Australia and Germany uh, and also China, there's other pressings of these albums. Like, for example, the one in China, on the back of both of the Glass Prism albums, if you flip it over, it's the poems of every song. And by the way, that was one of the first times that was ever done, other than the Beatles doing some of it
Hmm.
on Sgt. Pepper's album. But when it's released in China, obviously they're not going to put the words up there that Edgar wrote because they're English. So they just put a big picture of Edgar Allan Poe there and the names of the songs, but it's still the same album. So, you know, 69 is when that album came out, and we're still talking about it in 2024, almost 25. And we will be talking about it then. We get asked to do shows, and I don't just mean bars, I mean concerts. That's what we get asked to do regularly. Like we've been asked to go in October. They wanted us to come down to the Edgar Allan Poe Historic Site in Virginia, but I couldn't get the guys to do that. So too far to drive. They wanted us to do it to be the headliner because they're doing this big Edgar Allan Poe event that they do every year, where it goes for 3 or 4 days. People come dressed in costumes. There's all kinds of things that happen. There's a big ball that they have uh, on the Saturday night. So things like that are constantly popping up. And we decide at some point which things we're going to do.
Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left. Any closing words that you'd like to say?
Well, really, I'm really grateful to you. And I would love to know how you even became a fan and how
Oh,
that,
I've known about your music since the late 90s, because I used to do radio and I'm a record collector and I'm a hip hop fan. So somewhere along those travels, I ran into your album on a compilation. It was on a compilation, some underground compilation LP that came out during the late 90s. And then it made me research because the song A Dream Within a Dream was the first song I heard about when I heard it first, started getting into the Glass Prism. And then from there, I just took it from there. I just did my research, combed through the record shops, looked through all the records in the psychedelic rock section. I ran into it. I picked up both albums, and I've been a fan ever since. That was in early 2000, I think, 2000, 2001, when I
get
picked up
that.
both through the Glass Prism and She on Joy and on Joy and Sorrow back in 1970. And I've been a fan ever
I'm,
since.
that's awesome. That's what I love to hear. Nothing could make me feel better than what you just said.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's just a
Very humble.
beautiful
Very humble.
story. Beautiful story. And yes, you're right. There's been dozens of compilation albums using our material, none of them with our permission. But like I said, to me, it's a compliment. If they want to use our material, if it can get heard by you, nothing's better than that.
Thank you.
Beautiful,
Thank you.
beautiful thing.
Well, then, Mr. Verano. Oh, yeah, you're about to say something. Go ahead.
I was going to say, please take the time to read our bio and discography. I sent it to you. It's 20 something, it's a book, but it tells you everything about some of the stuff we talked about, but more detail about all the different record labels that have used us, all kinds of special things that have happened. And there's links that you can click on to check out whatever the documentary or the live show that we did. So a lot of that stuff is there. It's a lot of fun, worthwhile if you take a few minutes to check it out. And we want fans to email me at hmi67@aol.com anytime with any questions or any interest. I'll be glad to send you the links so that you have all the contacts. You listen to all the music. Let me know how you feel about it. Take it for what it's worth. And if you're going to do a podcast, contact you.
There you go. There you go.
I'm
All right,
really
sir.
glad. I'm really honored that you asked me to do this, and the guys will be thrilled.
Oh, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. I'm honored just to have you on the show, just telling us your story about the beginning of Glass Prisms, the humble beginnings, and so forth and so on. So I feel honored for and thank you once again for availing time out of your schedule to come on the program. And you could come back anytime.
I just want to tell you one thing, Earl, as we
Yeah.
leave. I told you the Mort Lewis story, right?
No.
He, how he disappeared.
Oh, yes, yes. At the beginning.
He was gone until 2012. He left the entertainment business. Think about this. Dave Brubeck, you know who I'm talking about,
Yeah.
Take Five,
Yeah.
Blood, Sweat, and Tears,
Uh-huh.
Simon Garfunkel, and you leave the industry? In 69, he had to be one of the top managers in America because a lot of the big groups were coming from across the ocean, right? So he had Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Simon Garfunkel. 2012, he resurfaces for the first time, being interviewed in Boston because he was going to get together with Art Garfunkel. A year later, he passed away, but he did resurface, so he wasn't gone forever. But where was he from 69 to 2012? No one knows. I wrote him a letter. I sent him our new album. How you doing? I sent him the documentary, but he didn't respond because he passed away shortly after I sent it. I don't know if he was ill or whatever it was, but that's kind of like the mystery of this group.
Mm. Um,
Otherwise, we might have been a much bigger group than we were. But we're happy with our lives. We've had good lives and had a lot of fun, and we love each other. Me and the guys, we're just like we're brothers
I
forever.
just want to say personally, thank you. I'd like to thank you and the group for making those albums because those are some phenomenal albums. The music was just phenomenal, is phenomenal, and it's constantly on my Spotify. Even though I have the vinyl, the original vinyls to both LPs, it's on my Spotify constantly. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and look for those brand new vinyls.
Oh yeah.
They won't have any scratches on them. And they
Okay.
also released them in color. So you can
Uh,
get them in black or in color. So that's kind of cool. We're glad that people are still recognizing us. Earl, thanks so much for having me.
Anytime. And like I said, you're welcome to come back anytime you want. Okay.
Sounds great.
All right, Mr. Varano. Take it easy. Peace.
Peace.
All right.
Take care.